Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we're watching some popular streaming show week to week, providing some context, some insight, and often some other recommendations along the way. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the 11th episode of HBO Max's hit series, The Pitt. The show is approaching the end of shift, the 12-hour shift, but of course, it is a 15-episode season. So how does it extend beyond that shift? And today, very curious to know. For this conversation, I'm joined once again by my wife, Kim, who had a very emotional reaction to this week's episode. On the podcast at large, we continue to go week to week discussing DTF St. Louis, which seems to be getting very popular on the podcast. And I think the ratings have been climbing week to week on the show itself. And Darren and I will be discussing Paradise, the post-apocalyptic action thriller on Hulu, which has its penultimate episode this very week. And for anybody who saw season 1, the penultimate episode of season 1 was one of the highest rated and a most viral episodes of TV all year round. And we had huge ratings for that last year. So very curious to see if they are trying to match the template of having a true viral episode this week as well. All remains to be seen. And of course, as I mentioned, just 2 episodes to go on that series, very close to the end. Before we get into the episode, last week I had mentioned I'm just going to have one call to action per week to have everybody focus on. I did a terrible job I introduced it and then did not follow up in the subsequent episodes of reiterating it or reinforcing it. And nonetheless, we actually got a bunch of new reviews. I had mentioned that only about 10% of the audience, actually less than 10% of the audience, has actually given us a star rating on all these different platforms. So just a reminder to everybody, if you've ever wanted to give us a star rating, and a bunch of you did, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All those little micro activities actually help drive traffic to the podcast. For today's call to action, and I will try to reiterate this in the rest of the episodes upcoming, I actually have a general tip for everybody out there, something that you might find useful in general, and simultaneously suggest a possible call to action that might help grow the listenership of the podcast. Okay, the tip. Here's the tip. Very useful, by the way. I use this all the time. If you've been listening to a podcast, this podcast, obviously, or any other podcast, and you might be looking for a particular topic, or you might have already listened to the podcast, and now you're looking for a particular moment in the conversation, and traditionally you would be like scrubbing through the conversation, trying to find that point. Apple Podcasts, other podcasts have this as well, but my tutorial here will be specifically about Apple Podcasts. Has a very cool feature, and I think Apple does it pretty much best out of all these different podcasting platforms that I've investigated. There's a lot of things I don't like about Apple Podcasts, by the way. Just to be clear, it's not my preferred podcasting app, but this feature is very good. And what that is if you're listening to this podcast, you're trying to find a particular moment to share with somebody else, or just to re-listen to a particular part of the conversation, what you do is you start playing the episode, you open the app, which of course shows the episode you're listening to, including the show notes. You scroll past the show notes, and what you'll see is a link that says transcription, and it actually shows you the beginning of the transcription. Touch on the word transcription and click on that link, and it will open a full transcription of the entire podcast. Now, of course, that allows you to read it if you wanted to read the podcast, and the transcription's auto-generated by some AI, I assume, that Apple uses. So it's very good, I think, but not always perfect. It actually creates titles that break the conversation up. Very cool. Those aren't things that I've provided. Those are things that are auto-generated with the content. But the really important part of this is go to the upper right-hand corner of that transcription page and then search for a name, search for a moment in the conversation, search for one of the particular titles. If we're covering a couple of different things in the podcast, search for the title of the show, for example, and then that way you might jump directly to that point in the conversation. And then once you have located that part of the conversation, you can actually start playing from that particular place in the transcription. But, and here's where the call to action comes into, you can also share from that specific point. So if you hold your finger down anywhere in the conversation, in the transcription, there'll be an option there to share and then a timestamp, share from that point. So, call to action. Again, you can do this with any podcasting app. YouTube supports this as well, but obviously Apple very conveniently having its own ecosystem. If you'd like to share a specific moment in this conversation or any of our podcasts, and you have friends or family, or you participate in some social media conversation pertaining to this show or any of the other shows we're covering, find a particular moment in our podcast that might relate to a conversation you're having or someone you're trying to introduce the podcast to, or that you just found entertaining in your listening of it, and hold your finger down on it, wait for the menu to pop up, click share from timestamp, and just take that link and paste it into iMessage or post it on your social media and share it to one person or one post on social media this week. If it's convenient for you all, it would help us grow the podcast. All those little interactions, all those minor little posts you make, thumbs up you give, shares you do, all help drive traffic to us. And the algorithm's always watching. Any little microtransaction does increase and boost our profile. I do hope you use this very cool feature, whether you're listening to our podcast or any others. I use it all the time. I listen to a conversation all the way through, and then I want to talk to my wife about a particular part of the conversation, and I just quickly search through the transcription, find the moment I'm talking about, and then play her 5 or 10 minutes of the podcast I'm listening to, rather than re-listening to everything or scrubbing and her impatiently waiting for me to find the moment in the conversation. So I do hope that is a useful tool for you, regardless of whether you use it to promote us or not. Okay, so that's the call to action this week. We'd love to have you share some of our content. One last thing, I will be watching the new Ryan Gosling science fiction film, Project Hail Mary, which opened this week. I will be watching it tonight in IMAX, hopefully, and expect my review to pop up somewhere. Probably it'll be in the Paradise conversation with Darren, and Darren may be catching up with that film as well. All right, let's get into the conversation. Kim and I discussing this most recent episode of The Pitt. All right, Kim, so you just finished watching this episode, and this was very upsetting to you. So without getting too much into the details, because we'll have to break this all down, I did want to get your general impressions of this episode. I personally thought it was interesting that we have now seen the theme of the season. I've been questioning some of the decisions over the course of the season, but now we have the theme of the season emerging, which I'll get into much more detail as we discuss this. So a really strong episode comparing it to last year. Here's where the shit hits the fan, and it's going to be really crazy. And actually, it has become emotionally crazy for these doctors, but not the same trajectory of last season, but very character-driven, really interesting, a lot of payoffs here. But I wasn't as emotionally affected by this one as I have been by other episodes of the show. So very curious to get your general impression.
I was very emotionally affected by this, more so than any other episode I have seen, and I have seen all of them. What set me off, and we can certainly go in order of the scenes here, but what set me off was seeing the ICE agent with his camouflage mask. That literally put me over the edge. I was on the treadmill trying to jog while watching this show. And once that scene started playing out, I then proceeded to cry for the remainder of the episode while trying to run and keep myself calm. I was also getting text messages and emails about a camping trip that we're going on with the Girl Scouts today, and work people were calling me. So it was a whole conglomeration of my memories of other things that have happened to me in the PA world, plus the trauma of the ICE agent. So it was a lot for me.
And you were also getting all this external stimulus as well, which is maybe one of the key themes of this episode of the show, and of course of the season again. Just to touch on that, just to introduce it now, I think that the key theme we saw here is basically defined by when we have Robbie saying that this is like a walled garden. You have to keep the world out of here. You have to, which is impossible. And it's his perspective that he can do that. And of course, in this particular episode, it just shows the fallacy of all that. And of course, in this entire season, right? Santos has this antagonism with Langdon. Langdon had this drug addiction, McKay has also had issues with addiction in the past as well. So there's sympathy there or empathy there between the two of them. People have their own personal experiences with, for example, this woman's dying with this cancer patient has died. And the idea of just being like, I'm okay now, when we specifically see that nurse who is her death doula is like now going to take a shift off or something because she's just like, I'd rather just work and not think about this because I'm embedded in their lives. So this whole idea that we could just keep the whole outside world out there, outside, and how that fractures when not only are you already having the outside world, like your mom's texting you or whatever, all these things that are coming from the outside that you somehow are trying to ignore while you're in this environment. And now you literally have like ICE agents coming in there and standing next to you while you're trying to treat the patient or just interview the patient. And like the outside world will not stay outside.
Yeah, and that is true in the world of medicine, always, where you're trying to do your job, but at the same time, you're having personal interactions, which sometimes you can barely do when you're in the middle of an ER shift. And yeah, the external world becomes a reality literally in this episode. And I think overall, the Pitt does a good job of having this ability to have character development, which in the reality of the ER, sometimes you don't really know a lot about your colleagues because there's no time to ask them things. I find that now in my current job where I work with surgical residents all day and we're like dividing up tasks and we don't have time to ask them, how's your day? How's your family? Where are you from? How did you get to New Jersey? It's amazing to me that years go by and I'm like, oh, you grew up in Texas. I had no idea because you're focused all day long. But this episode really kind of plays off that theme of the characters are not able to keep those personal details out of the story.
I think everybody can relate to that. I just had a meeting we merged with another team within the organization I work at. And there's a few people have worked in tech and maybe just in traditional corporations in general. There's this ritual oftentimes when you have like a new manager where they'll say, here's a fact about me you may not know. And then they ask the entire team to do the same thing. And it's always so fascinating to me when they do this exercise because the whole team is sitting there. These are people that you've known for years and you've had talks about business and you've even talked about the sports or the news of the day with these people in between meetings. And then they're like, I'm a semi-pro ranked volleyball player. And you're like, what? How did I not know that? I've known you for 4 years. And it's the type of thing that you are, surprised to discover about the people you see every single day. And in medicine, of course, when you think about, you only kind of talk about these things about yourself when you have that gap in, conversation or whatever's happening. I assume in medicine, you're always just talking about the case in front of you. So even less likely to have that kind of personal interaction.
One of my friends that I've had for years, I recently discussed that I played basketball in high school and briefly in college. And she was literally floored by this because why would this come up? So yes, we are people too with previous lives.
And since we are people with previous lives, we should show each other empathy, which is, again, another thing, very importantly, that we see specifically in this episode of the show. But empathy or a lack of empathy or who we choose to show empathy to is, again, another key theme emerging in this particular season of the show. Okay, before we get too far into breaking down this particular episode, I want to talk about an email that I got from Ian in New York, who's emailed us before, and we've called out his emails here previously. But very much wanted to talk about this email, which just came in this week and touches on a whole bunch of things, some of them that pay off in this very episode, but also as a kind of a reset to, this is part of the reason I like having these conversations, or I should say these emails come in from our listeners, because it kind of allows us to reset our conversation based on perhaps how people perceive our conversation. And this also dovetails with the conversation we had with your mom just last week, specifically about the Pitt. So first of all, in his email, I'm going to quote from the email. It's a very long email, and I'm going to save some of this commentary for later because it gets addressed specifically in this very episode of the show. But he mentions the fact that regarding Robbie and Hashimi, I understand what she was saying about Mohan. This is when she accuses him of lacking in empathy for Mohan. But she's accusing Robbie of having no empathy, and maybe the way we discussed her on the podcast as well, in a very cavalier way, just kind of in passing, being like, wow, he's not showing much empathy. And I think that it's important to kind of clarify that in the fact that or at least me, when I'm having that gut reaction to the moment, I'm not necessarily saying that Robbie lacks an empathy because, and this is called out specifically in the email, you think about how much empathy he shows to Louis, or the empathy he showed today where they had to sign in this episode, had to sign the death certificate. And that wordless, really powerful scene where him and Javadi just kind of are crying silently, trying to get the signature on the death certificate and kind of sharing that communal moment. So there's definitely empathy there. And then there's this lack of empathy with Mohan. And I think about the frustration we have with our children, where he's like, you're having a panic attack. Like, how self-indulgent of you, which is probably, he's had a panic attack just last season, right? So it's probably something he says to himself. So I don't think that or I should just be clear that I'm not being critical of Robbie in saying those things. And I don't think the show is trying to be, although people may interpret it that way, that first of all, the show is saying that these are complex characters that may have strong character or strong interpersonal skills with one person, but then lack it with somebody else, given the circumstance, etc. And also the fact that, of course, the thing that irritates you the most, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, the thing you look in your kids and you get most frustrated with, or even with your coworkers, is the same thing that is touching your raw nerve. It's your weakness as well. So I think that it's very interesting that the show isn't doing this accidentally. It's doing it very much on purpose. So I think that is an interesting detail. And I think it's explored here in this particular episode. Again, this idea of who you show empathy to.
Yeah, it's all related to your personal experience. I can say that about our daughter. The qualities that annoy me the most are qualities that I possessed as a child as well. And I see that in her. And I can't change that about myself, and I can't change that about her. And I get so mad.
Right. And of course, it's always the way it is. Someone can have a weakness that it does not overlap with your own weaknesses at all. And you're extremely empathetic to them because it does not resonate deeply with yourself or touch on or expose your own weakness. And the other point, before we get too far down that road, which I probably will circle back to this email later, but another point he makes, he wasn't talking about specifically our podcast, but other podcasts about the Pitt that he mentions, and also the social media reaction that people are watching the show, like watching Langdon and watching Santos be so irritated for this period of time. And they are watching the show week to week as if this is a week to week time frame. And he points out, I think very correctly, and it's a good resetting here because we had this very conversation with your mom, the idea of being like, how long is this going to drag on for? I'm like, they've been like the beginning to end of this particular case, or beginning to end to this particular fight, has been like 2 hours. Like, in your personal life, you're not going to be like, I had this blow up fight with somebody and 2 hours later we were totally cool. So it's a reframing that we need to make, like, as you're watching this. And we had multiple conversations with your mom about being irritated with a character because they still haven't gotten over something. I'm like, in the timeline of the show, that was 15 minutes ago. So she's not going to get over it. Or specifically, another point was the baby. How long is this? How many months is this baby going to be sitting in the? It's like the baby's been there for 5 or 6 hours. You know, like they have not found someone with all the catastrophes in the hospital that day. They have not been able to find a foster parent yet.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that because there's so much going on in each episode that you do lose the timeline. So
interesting points. And we'll circle back to, we're going to specifically talk about the negative social media reaction to Santos as a character and how Ian in his email was very defensive of her actions. And it is maybe one of the most important scenes in this entire season of show happens, their confrontation that Al-Hashimi overhears. And of course, importantly, putting, a period on that sentence of, he has been apologizing for being an addict, but this is a much worse violation that he's committed. And Ian calls this out in his email of saying that there are some people that these actions, if they weren't in a medical institute, they would go to jail. So Santos and Robbie are less forgiving of him, but what he's done is potentially could have gotten him in jail.
Yes, he did break the law. And Santos at the end of this episode has clearly not forgiven him for that. And I personally have a little more sympathy for him as an addict. But yes, there is a fine line considering what he did was not legal.
Yeah, and we'll circle back to that because there's more to see there. And I think Al-Hashimi observing these interpersonal dynamics across multiple different events that happen here as an outsider is starting to get like very concerned about this is a very dysfunctional family, basically. All right, maybe we'll just start with it. I know it's going to get you upset, but of course, the big, probably what everyone's going to be talking about is this, again, this violation of the outside world coming into this walled garden, which of course happens over and over again. This cyber attack is the same idea. It's like, why isn't we literally saw this on social media, people being like, why would they run a health system this way? Those systems should not speak with the outside world at all. And then they couldn't get hacked. And I'm like, what value does a computer have like those if you can't share medical records, if you can't? And of course, these tools themselves are cloud-based, like Epic is like cloud-based system. So at some point it can be attacked because the internet connects all devices to each other. So even the cyber attack itself is like the outside world refuses to stay outside. And of course, now we have this physical manifestation of it when this very much intentionally cast 6'5" ICE agent comes in with this 4'8" woman, who they have basically injured her shoulder during the arrest. So this was very upsetting to you.
Yes. Obviously, it is reflecting current events that we have recently lived through with the kind of ICE infestation of various cities. This specific scene obviously pays homage to Alex Preddy and his murder in Minneapolis. Obviously, the nurse in this scene is not murdered. He is arrested, but it is very traumatic. So that is why I got so upset.
This ICE storyline has been teased earlier in the season, and the producer mentioned that this script was written an entire year ago. I think they're making it sound like we wrote this and then it was in the headlines. This show was shot starting in the summer through the fall. So I am pretty sure that by the time they were actually shooting these scenes, that real world infiltrated the way these scenes were written. I'm sure the scripts existed before, but of course, by the time it hits the screen, there's a lot of changes that occur. So definitely it's touching on the real world instances of this. And we've seen, like, I actually asked this question to you off mic, and you can add more detail to this if you've ever seen ICE agents in your hospital. But I just looked online, and if you just type in ICE agents in the emergency room, you see many, many videos of doctors and nurses just on their TikToks and such, but also just actual events where they're speaking to the media saying, we cannot do our jobs with ICE agents in our emergency rooms. And they're talking about exactly what we see here, where I'm trying to interview the patient and the ICE agents are like interjecting. So like, this is what actually happened. Like they're basically.
Even just this man's physical presence is what has set everyone off. And you have patients leaving the waiting room. You have staff leaving, even though, as Javadi's mom commented, these people are protected, but they're still scared. So they've now walked off the job and everyone is in a full-blown panic over it. I have not seen ICE agents in my hospital. There is a policy in effect that if an ICE agent is on scene at a hospital, the nurses are calling risk management and getting like administrators involved from the beginning so that nothing potentially escalates. But obviously, in this current political climate, we have many people living in fear that something terrible is going to happen to them or a family member. And for a moment, when Dr. Robbie finally says to this ICE agent, I need you to step back. I need to do my job. We have people who are scared. We have a patient we need to take care of. So can you please let us do our job? And he says, no problem. And then 5 seconds later, this scuffle occurs and Javadi captures it on her cell phone, which we all know all of that has been in the media with cell phone footage telling the story when other people are not telling the story. We have actual video capture of these moments. And Javadi, I'm sure, will post some of this, we assume, because she is a social media presence. So it is a great commentary on current events.
Yeah, it's a little on the nose. This show can be unsettled sometimes, but has to be, considering that we're going like in real time. But we have it spoken out loud and still is revelatory to me too, because I don't think about all the little subtle things here. It's not only that they're there. It's not only that they're encumbering the, diagnosis and treatment of that particular patient. It's also the fact everything we see here. Patients see ICE agents in the building. They're like, ICE agents might be coming here in general. So they leave the emergency room. As Robbie mentions, those people will be back at some point and injured. And you have healthcare workers themselves. Some of it is just the staff that, who may actually be undocumented. And then you have actually employees who are tenuously documented. We I know that from working in technology that there's a lot of times when it's like your H-1B visa, if I'm like, for these are tech workers I'm talking about, are like kind of in process. And then there's kind of like this gray area, especially when they know that anybody's basically fair game at this point. And then, of course, there's also this idea that they may actually have people who are frontline workers or core surgeons, nurses, et cetera, that are involved in the surgeries, like we hear about Javadi Sr., the mom up top, talking about people they lost because they have a protected status. But we have seen just this week where a whole segment of the population is suddenly, you were protected last week, we have revoked your protection. So now they don't know, like ICE agents may very well be like just getting your information so that they can track you down once your status changes next week. And these people don't want to be anywhere near ICE agents. So all of that is obviously very detrimental to anybody in that building getting treatment.
Agree with your assessment on that one, Victor.
I'm glad we're on the same page.
I'm not going to cry about it right now.
Hold it together, woman.
My emotional reaction to the ICE agent was then exponentially worse when we had the child with heat stroke come in.
Yeah, that's another big case this week. By the way, these are genuine. Ian also commented on the fact that you're a good addition to the podcast and that we have genuine interactions with each other. These may be the only genuine interactions we have all week, everybody.
That's not
This is why I force her onto the podcast.
We never discuss anything about the Pitt before we sit down and talk about it on air. So it's all impromptu and it seems to work out okay. And it is the longest conversation we do have at one time.
That's true. But usually because your phone is put away, so we don't have the constant interruptions, as we all do. Let's talk about that other big case. Obviously, the other emotional case. We're hitting the hard stuff early. We'll get to the lighter stuff later. But there is some lightness in this episode and just a lot of character development as well. But
the lightness is completely overshadowed by these few scenes.
These are tough. So you already introduced it. I was going to kind of give you a little reprieve, but this kid who's suffering from heat stroke, and very interesting for me watching it, the perception that people have of it, where immediately people are like, why wasn't she watching the kid? Do you think she did it on purpose? Someone actually says, do you think? Because she's not reacting the way she's supposed to react. And we specifically have someone say that, you never know how people react to things. Of course, she is nearly catatonic and then tries to step in front of a truck. So not the best response there, obviously.
Yeah, Robbie comments on what you had just said, where some people don't react as you'd expect. And she's traumatized that her son could potentially be, neurologically damaged, if not dead, potentially. And they have a close-up of her holding his hand. And she drops his hand and she exits the ER. And maybe she's having a moment where she can't believe this has happened. We then learn that she is now going to attempt suicide in the street.
There's a whole bunch of interesting things going on here. Some of it is just maybe not the best writing, to be honest. But it's curious where they're saying this boy might be permanently impaired, even if he survives. And it seems like he is going to survive now. And now that she's been put on this psychiatric hold, that he might be out of the hospital before she is. But that's quite a variation of outcomes where he might get back to normal temperature, become responsive again. I guess the other parent would come and pick up the kid within the next 24 hours versus, that seems like quite a variation.
I don't think they should be worrying about this at all.
They just care about number of beds.
We are getting way ahead of ourselves here. We don't know the outcome for either one of these characters.
Yeah, the fact that someone actually calls that out, he might be out of here before she is, it seems to be like, again, not the
Langdon
most.
Langdon said that.
Not the most.
Can you focus on the moment? This seems irrelevant.
Since we're in the heavy stuff, before we move on to that, I have one more, and I think you're going to have a lot of insight into this particular case. But before we get there, a question about heat stroke with children, not necessarily, being left in the car. We hear stories like that, which is actually absolutely tragic when people incredibly leave their kids in the car.
Yeah,
and then go shopping or whatever. It's nuts.
I know of a few stories of child death from being accidentally left in the car. Friends of friends, not anyone I've known personally. I've not seen a patient like that, thank God. But you see stories in the news where it doesn't take long when you're in 100-degree weather with no windows open, where pets can die and children can certainly succumb to heat stroke.
So that was going to be one of my questions. Have you seen this where, for example, somebody just goes and, I mean, in this particular case, let's say the child went and just took a nap in the car. Dad had someone on one of his job sites who in the summer was working construction and went and took a nap in the car because it was just, he was, needed a break at lunchtime and died from being in the car in the heat, right? Just because probably dehydrated, physically active in a very hot day. And you can imagine just falling asleep and then dying in your sleep given your fatigue. But have you seen cases like that before? How about like exercise exhaustion? That could happen as well, right?
It certainly could. I've seen patients who have rhabdo, which is where your muscle proteins break down from heavy exercise. They commented on that in this episode because they're checking his CK level, which is like your muscle enzyme that breaks down with muscle damage. They're checking that because if that's very high, you can go into kidney failure. I have seen patients in kidney failure from strenuous exercise where they go into this muscle protein breakdown state, but they recovered. I've not seen anyone die of rhabdo or heat stroke.
You did mention on an earlier episode, just this season, I guess there was, because of the heat exhaustion, because multiple people have come in here with heat stroke, that, what do they call that? The
Arctic sun.
Arctic sun?
Yeah, we use that as a cooling device for that indication. We also use it for patients who have had witnessed cardiac arrest because cooling them can help preserve their function. So we do have Arctic suns in the emergency room. This child is put directly on ice. I've not seen that specifically happen either, but the Arctic sun is, cooling pads that you can hook up that work right away to cool someone.
So this storyline also affected you a lot, other than the obvious, right? Of course, we all worry about something terrible happening to our children. Why did this affect you so much? Or is it just simply that?
I mean, it is just simply that. It is so tragic. This mom asks her son to help her in the garden. He doesn't want to. And then he's out riding his bike and then he's not. So she doesn't really know where he went. And then she finds him in the car. And he's been in the car in a hot environment for long enough where he's now unresponsive. And as a mom or a father, can you imagine that happening to you where this accidental situation arises and now you've discovered that something potentially life-threatening is going on with your kid? It's so traumatic to even think about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I always think about, thank goodness we're at a point now where our daughter's old enough where it's past that phase, because I remember having a baby in the house and literally waking up in the middle of the night. Is she breathing? Is she breathing? And then even like when she's slightly older, 3, 4, 5 years old and pretty independent at that point, but we're like at a fair and then for some reason she's literally there and then she's out of sight and she might just be around the corner or behind the table or just slightly blocked by someone standing there. And then that moment where for whatever reason they don't respond. Sometimes they do that too. Like you're yelling for them and they don't respond to you. It's so irritating.
I had that situation happen when our daughter was probably 3. We went into a department store and she thought it would be funny to hide and not respond when I called her name. I have never in my life been so panicked for perhaps 2 minutes. Like it was a very short period of time, but it feels like a lifetime when your helpless child potentially could have disappeared.
Yes, it's utterly terrifying and literally would give me nightmares. So at least she's at an age now where if there's all other types of problems they could get into now. Like I'm always worried about screen time and who they're talking to on internet and et cetera and so forth. But the fact that like minimally, it's like if they've hurt themselves or they need help, they can call out and you're not like panicked that these kids just wander off and God help us if something bad happens.
I'm not sure if you were with me when this happened, but we were crossing the street in Long Beach Island. My dad was on one side of Charlotte and I was on the other. I don't think you were there. We were crossing a main street and she was probably 2 and she decided to step into the street. And it's a busy road where cars move very quickly. And my dad and I grabbed her out of the street as a car went whizzing by. And I was like paralyzed for a moment. And my dad like yelled out her name after we knew she was safe. But it was like this moment of sheer and utter panic that if we hadn't gotten to her within that second, something terrible could have happened. And I'll never forget it. So you spend your whole life trying to protect your kids. And then sometimes things are completely out of your control.
I was not there. And when the two of you start yakking back and forth, you do lose track of everything else around you. So I'm not surprised that you let the kid wander into the street.
Oh my God, we didn't let her wander. She was standing next to us and just jumped into the road.
It's amazing she survived this long.
I'm going to kill you.
Okay, we're not getting lightened up yet because I want to talk to you about Ogilvy's patient. So a couple of things here. Ogilvy has a really bad week. Started last week already, right? Maybe a couple of weeks now and he was like the rock star at the beginning of this episode of or should I say season of the show, and has been degrading over the course of the season, becoming like a punching bag, like a joke punching bag, and now kind of missing some key things. So his favorite patient right now reminds him of his dad. He gave him a book to read. They've been bonding. And it really feels like this is the Whitaker's, you know how Whitaker lost a patient last season. Feels like Ogilvy, unfortunately, may be headed for this. Although in the moment, at least, seems to be healthy. And speaking of kidneys, they just thought it was a kidney stone. He's presented with kidney stones before. Everybody hydrate, not only for heat stroke, but kidney stones.
But if your aorta is going to rupture, doesn't matter if you're hydrated.
Right. I'm just saying for kidney stones. But yes, so.
Yeah, so this patient has flank pain and he looks fine. And they do a bedside ultrasound of his kidneys. And that's the only thing that the medical student is looking at is the kidneys. You can diagnose an aortic aneurysm by putting an ultrasound probe on the abdomen. But they've gone down this path of, oh, this is renal colic. This is pain from kidney stones. Flank pain was there. Now he's better. He's completely stable. No one's terribly concerned about this patient.
And Mohan signed off on it. And of course, Mohan's been very distracted.
Yes, Mohan's distracted. They didn't actually look at this man's aorta. Also, his pain resolved. So like the clinical suspicion that this is now a symptomatic aortic problem is quite low from the presentation. Also, in the normal world of ER medicine, I call it the ABCs of ER medicine, airway, breathing, CAT scan. Everyone gets imaging when they come to the ER in most cases. That's kind of a joke, but it is true because we have all these resources. You can easily send someone to CAT scan. It takes 10 minutes. But now, of course, we're in the cyber attack world where everything is delayed and people are distracted and you can't get normal things accomplished in real time. So perhaps this patient would have had a CAT scan initially. You would get a CAT scan to diagnose kidney stones. However, it wouldn't diagnose a ruptured aorta, but it would certainly diagnose an aneurysm. So this was a setup of all of these bad circumstances all combined in one, and they don't make this discovery until he's become unresponsive. How they managed it is another problem. First of all, someone needs to call vascular surgery right away. It takes them too long to call vascular surgery. They're messing around. They know it's a ruptured aorta. The only way to stop someone from dying from a ruptured aorta is to get them on the OR table with a vascular surgeon. So, of course, there's no vascular surgeon available. Why is this? I spend my day responding to vascular emergencies. So we're at a big hospital where the vascular surgeon should be somewhere nearby, for God's sakes. Anyway, so now we have Javadi's mom showed up, who's a general surgeon. So she can't actually fix this problem. And they ended up doing a thoracotomy to clamp the aorta. If you were dealing with this in real life, the best way to stop bleeding is to go into the groin and put a balloon up into the aorta and inflate the balloon so that the blood flow to the aorta stops so you can stop the patient from dying. So get a balloon up in the aorta. You don't have to do a thoracotomy.
Or you pop the chest open and put a clamp right on the aorta. There you go.
All we need is a coda balloon, for God's sakes. But anyway, so now we have a thoracotomy and now we have no vascular surgeon, but the patient's not dead. So they have a little window here to try to fix his aorta if they can find a goddamn vascular surgeon.
They must have him upstairs. Garcia will do it.
Garcia does everything. She probably can't fix an aorta. She's like a fourth-year resident, don't forget.
Yeah, I assume she's just triaging up there on the surgical floor because, yeah, we've talked about that before where, of course, this is not a week-to-week show. Like we've already talked about the timeline here. This is hour to hour. So the idea that Garcia is going downstairs being like, I could have solved that in 30 seconds and then comes back, what you got for me now? And it's just like, is she just going up there? Just like, boop, boop, I did a heart transplant. What do you got now?
I wish in the next episode they show the vascular surgeon being so mad that they did a thoracotomy.
What'd you think about this where, first of all, Javadi Sr. is down there going to talk about Robbie. I hear ICE is in the building. So that's the main reason she's down there. Happens to be called in to this emergency and says, I like how, she was putting down the real medical providers with actual skills. They're upstairs. And Robbie didn't even hear that, but seems to be referencing it when he goes, why don't you grab that scalpel over there and put on some gloves and show us why you deserve to be in the ED, right? What did you think of that?
That was a great comment. That was putting it right back in her lap from last episode.
But she does it. She's just like, okay. She gets a little neck movement going. She's like, I'll show you. And then she cuts it open, pops the chest open. And, we've seen this again, not the full clamshell, which was shocking, utterly shocking earlier this year. I'm like, you could do that? Oh my God. They just had enough room, just big enough for her hand to fit in there. Small hand, small woman, small hand. And then it's Javadi Jr. who goes in there and massages the heart until it's pumping blood again.
Good job, Dr. J.
Not a lot of blood. Like Ogilvy surprised that there's not a lot of blood. And he says it's all in the abdomen, right?
Yeah. We're presuming this is an abdominal aortic aneurysm that's ruptured. So they've clamped the aorta above it in the chest. So the bleeding is down below.
Let's stay on Ogilvy a little bit. So we have this moment, he's kind of been brought low multiple times, but very importantly, we've seen him over the course of this season be like very sarcastic about the weight of one patient. And then when Louis dies and he's just like, oh, I wonder how he died. Well, a liver failure. What a surprise, right? And everybody kind of looks at him askance. And the whole idea that he obviously lacks empathy. And I think that this is something that McKay has honed in on and very much intentionally says, well, why don't you come for me at an inopportune time, by the way, but still, why don't you come for me? I'm just going to wander outside and give free medicine to this drug addict, Kiki, it's her name, I think. And again, a little bit of a shock, but I like to Ogilvy, he's a little bit shocked by seeing this circumstance. And again, looking at this woman, like, what's going on here? And I'm not sure if the did what McKay wanted him to do, but it is interesting that McKay says you should be part of the street team because in a way to force you to
should learn how other people live, and you should learn to understand their circumstance in some way, shape, or form so that you can care for them as a doctor. It does not, I don't think, provide him with a different point of view. Also, she gets in trouble, of course, for just walking out of the ER to go provide free care to this woman. Dr. Robbie is very unhappy with her on that one.
And he knows about this, of course, because he's the one who had to go in there and deal with the death of Roxy, the cancer patient, when, while she's outside this is basically, I think, the very first scene of this episode is the cancer patient receiving that dose. And then in her saying, this usually takes hours, but of course it happens very quickly, just minutes later. And I think Robbie probably wasn't that inconvenienced by being the person there, but I think probably felt like McKay wanted to be there and missed it, of course. And then on top of that is the fact that, like, where were you? And then irritated by what she was actually spending her time on. And Robbie also, it's interesting, again, these are complex characters, which I appreciate in the show. Robbie does not seem to have a huge amount of empathy for addicts. And of course, McKay, having been an addict, I think has more empathy.
True, but at the same time, regardless of your status, your insurance status, your housing status, this woman could come to the ER to get her leg taken care of in the proper series of events. Absolutely. As opposed to, I'm just going to walk out of my ER shift to take care of her necrotic leg wound. So he has a point. I don't think he necessarily lacks sympathy for this woman.
I'm just saying that that's an additional factor, that he seems to have less empathy in that regard. So that's just a slightly additional irritant. But yes, the primary irritant is they're busy. She's not there. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And this woman could, if she had some kind of emergency, walk into the emergency room, or because they see her on a regular cycle when they're doing the street team. And I think this is a weekend coming up. So they may very well have seen her in a day or so. And I'm not sure how serious this issue is, but this seems to be that she's almost become like a big sister to this patient. And Robbie's, again, why is your personal life intervening in your medical decision-making?
Also, I think that woman needs to be admitted to the hospital for that wound, not just treated with some topical Meta-Honey and dressings. That lady needs some IV antibiotics and a debridement. But I'm assuming we can't talk this woman into that, so that's why McKay is treating her on the street.
And she does ask Ogilvy to basically suggest a treatment, and they do mention antibiotics, so I assume this would just be antibiotics you would...
I mean, maybe they have antibiotics, like oral antibiotics in their bag of goodies. That looks like it needs more than oral antibiotics.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, this seems like pretty serious.
That's a pretty bad looking wound. Meta-Honey will help a bit, but it looks like she's got like full thickness necrosis of her skin. I just want her to go to the operating room to get that fixed.
So this is Xylazine, which is...
Yeah, it's a systemic like skin reaction to a tranquilizer that she uses on the street, which is, as I've researched, a veterinary sedative that has become a street drug known as Trank. And sometimes it's laced with fentanyl, heroin, cocaine. God knows.
Man, I got to tell you, I don't understand. I'm like with Ogilvy on this one. Sometimes the addiction is its own thing, but I just figure like some of this stuff that people experiment with, I'm like, yikes, like this thing can cause necrosis, which literally is the case. And on top of that, you don't know what else you're taking. Fentanyl, you could overdose on fentanyl, obviously. It's just yikes. Yikes.
They're medicating a deeper problem. So however they feel
that is true
on these medications is better than they felt off of them, or else they wouldn't become addicts.
Do you have any kind of programs like that, or do you know of programs like that where they do this type of thing, where they'll have like a street team that goes out and helps people that don't
seems like it should be a real thing. I've worked more in suburban areas of New Jersey rather than urban areas, but I would imagine that they have this in the inner city. I would have to research it.
Okay, a couple of quick things that we can probably get through. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. I'll start with the bigger ones. Speaking of like the outside world intervening on the personal lives, or I should say professional lives of these doctors, we have I think the resolution here of Mel and Becca, her sister's relationship, and this fallout from discovering that Rebecca's in a relationship with one of her housemates, one of the center mates. And they're going to go watch the fireworks with his family. And the fact that, and of course, last week I speculated on the fact that part of the reason she's going to be upset about this is that she is sacrificing so much for her sister, doesn't have her own personal life, wants those same things that her sister does. And her sister, this is in a way like a parent-child relationship where you're like, I sacrifice so much, and they just like take and take and take, and they expect everything to be done to their standards. And you are sacrificing so that everything's comfortable for them. And then you realize like that, you're getting nothing back in return. And that's kind of the realization that people have in these kind of codependent relationships. But all that speculation from last week is to say that it's overtly said here. She literally says, I want to have sex too. She's having sex. I have seen Elf 150 times.
I think it was like 300 times.
Perhaps. Because it's the only movie she wants to watch. I want to watch different things. And then meanwhile, her sister has this whole other life going on while she's working and is just like, I didn't even tell you what's going on in my life. You don't even know.
I know. And now we've come to this kind of realization moment that now Dr. King is going to need to become a more independent person and less of a caregiver for her sister, who is able to make her own decisions. As she mentions, they have shared decision making. She is not her decision maker because she has the mental capacity to contribute to this decision making process. So in the stairway with Dana, she uses the F word, gets it all off her chest. So now hopefully she can move on to some extent and focus a bit more on herself now that she knows that she has to think about herself too.
I think it's supposed to be traumatic to her, but I actually saw this as a positive sign for the very reasons you said. Oftentimes when I think about people like in middle age who have been like trapped taking care of a sick parent, for example, and then they are so defined by that role of being like this at someone else's beck and call that it's catastrophic to them sometimes emotionally when like the parent passes away. And then they're suddenly like, what do I do with my time? My whole entire 24-hour day is around that. And on the one hand, it is scary because you have to change basically how you've defined yourself. But at the same time, it's liberating. It's like all those things you have not been doing. You have to start asking yourself, what are all those things you wanted to be doing? And now you get to do them. I know it's scary because it's changing, but you have to be your own person. And that's hopefully where Mel's getting to. And I did see that it seems to be going in a positive direction because there is this conciliatory tone she has with her sister where she says, you're right. We decided that I'm not going to make decisions for you. We're going to agree upon them. But her sister does kind of, on that note, her sister's kind of like, see you later, bye. So not exactly but of course her sister she's neurodivergent and probably doesn't have that kind of social tact in that particular case.
You do see her in a different light earlier in the season, where she is like calling her sister, like, when are you coming to get me? Are we going to go get ice cream? Are we going to do this? Like, her life is clearly very wrapped around her sister's life. And then suddenly now we have a boyfriend, which I guess is how that generally goes when your friend in high school gets a boyfriend and you're like, hello, what about me? But that's what happens when other relationships come into play.
Yeah, you just saying that makes me think about all those times that we can probably all relate to, all those times in your life where like you see this all the time, where two people are like utterly inseparable, like they've both broken up or something, and they go everywhere. What are we doing this weekend? Where are we eating? What club are we going to? What are we doing? What are we doing? And then one of them pairs off. And then all of a sudden it's just like, that whole symbiotic relationship, poof, they just disappeared. They're not there anymore. Briefly on Robbie, of course, he's involved in he's got his finger in every pie as usual. But very importantly, his friend Duke, right, shows up to the ER last week finally. And he's like, let's do a full workup. And I don't know why he suspected this, or if he did kind of have a dread in here, but it seems that what did he see on the X-ray? And
he saw that his mediastinum was widened. So you can see this like opacity in his chest, whether that is an aneurysm of his aorta, whether it's lymph nodes, whether it's a mass. You can't really tell exactly on a chest X-ray. But I'm assuming he had a clinical suspicion because this man is a drinker and a smoker and has not seen a doctor in a very long time. So he's doing his, $1 million primary care workup. So now Duke needs a CAT scan so we can see what this is. Because if it's something bad, they're not going on their motorcycle trip.
That seems to be more and more likely. And as a matter of fact, if his friend needs like some kind of workup or something, and this is a really bad outcome, I have a feeling he's not going to be taking any months off to travel.
No, I think that was my prediction last week. I think my prediction was that Duke has lung cancer, although that's not on the top of the list. It's still possible. There's some big lymph nodes potentially in his chest. So he brought up the possibility of lymphoma. Could be. And yes, Robbie is going to come back for the next season of the Pitt.
Well, I mean, theoretically, he could still take his sabbatical
There's
because
10 months
for a year
between first season and the second season. True. See, once again, the timeline gets confused in your head. So many things happen. But yes, anything is possible.
Oh, we definitely have to talk about the final moment here. And we definitely have to talk about Santos, Langdon, and Hashimi listening in and that kind of revelation. Maybe we'll save that just for one more moment. A couple more light points I want to touch on. This guy who's terrified that he's going to lose the ball he caught.
Oh, yeah.
All of this is so funny. First of all, he caught the ball, and then that he like tells Roberto Clemente, and Whitaker.
No idea who that is.
No idea what he's talking about. And he's like, well, we don't have a major league team in our
gets into
region.
Way too much detail. I'm from Nebraska. We didn't go to professional games.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're trying to do a neuro exam on this man's hand. He can clearly move all his fingers, but he won't move his thumb because he literally does not want to get rid of this ball. And the one scene I actually thought was not funny, but like apropos, was when they were reducing his elbow dislocation with no meds because the man said, I don't want to be sedated. I don't want morphine. I don't want anything. Just do it. You have the nurse practitioner character in the background who is just going about his day and whatever he's doing. He's just very serious. Meanwhile, the whole ER is filled with this man's screams, but no one's responding because there's always some sort of chaos going on. You just have to block it out. So he's straight-faced and doing whatever he's doing.
I noted the exact same thing. The character is Donnie. I keep calling him like that. I never use his name, but his name is Donnie. And I love that because this is like multiple times in this season where they cut to him very much so. And you have this screaming in the other room. And he's just like, do, 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 do. And it also reminds me of that time when Santos is trying to get her notes done earlier in the season. And the baby's crying right there. And she goes, will someone quiet that baby? And Donnie walks by and goes, what baby?
Oh, yeah, that's right. He's been an ER nurse. Now he's a nurse practitioner. He's like,
and I was a dad.
No, he's a dad. He's like, noise means nothing to me, which is not always good when you're in the
That's
ER,
for
ignoring
sure.
noise. Like monitors going off and you're hitting silent, so they stop making noise. But sometimes the monitors are making a noise for a reason.
Although when they're all going off at the same time, I'm not sure how useful it is.
I was in a patient's room yesterday and I was talking to him and like his neighbor's IV was beeping. And he was very distracted by the beep. I didn't even notice the beeping IV. He's like, can you go help that man before you talk to me? And I looked over behind the curtain, and the guy was sitting there like talking. And I'm like, no, he's fine. He's like, no, but that noise. I was like, oh, it's just his IV beeping. It's no big deal. He was very bothered by it.
I mean, if you're used to living at home alone, like many elderly people are, and there's very little noise, just having an incessant beep is probably going to be pretty distracting.
Being in the hospital must be a nightmare for people who are used to calm.
Or, think about Becca, someone who's neurodivergent, and, they have to turn the lights down. Could you imagine being in a room where, and we saw that actually in a previous episode, right? Where there was a patient that was on the spectrum perhaps, and like right away you go in there and turn off all the beeping and all the distractions. Because you can only imagine if you were very sensitive to noise, and all of a sudden like 8 different things are beeping around you and people are talking over each other and talking right in front of you over your body. You're like, what is going on?
Yeah, being a patient is very disruptive.
So another very important moment here in the season, of course, this confrontation where, of course, Langdon has been putting this off. He's been trying to make his amends, going around from person to person, doing his 12 steps, doing his apology. And most people have been kind of like, it's okay, we're good, don't worry about it. Of course, not everybody knows the full extent of the crime. And Santos is just like, I don't buy any of this. I know what actually happened. If you were in a different circumstance, you'd be in jail right now. And you should definitely not be doing this job anymore. And she feels like everyone's looking at her like, why can't she get over it? As if she's just judging him for being like an addict. How dare you be an addict? It's not like full extent of the story. And she's like, if you really want to make amends, you go around and you tell everybody what you actually did. And that is like very damning, because I think he has been, you even hear him say that here. Oh, my wife, I almost lost my wife. My family was so disrupted. I had to go to rehab for months. And she's like, woe was me. You should be in jail, right? So if you really want to make amends, then tell everybody what you really did and see if they still forgive you and they all just give you a pass. And of course, Robbie also is fully aware of this. So
I just seem to have a little bit more sympathy for Langdon than Santos does. It's like your mistakes should be you should be able to rehabilitate yourself if you put your mind to it and move on with your life and make amends. Like, whether or not he had to face legal consequences or not, he's clearly recognized his mistake. So I have a little bit more feeling for him and sympathy for him. Santos is more of this is a black and white problem, and you got a pass when you shouldn't have. I think there's a gray zone in there, even though he broke the law.
I mean, we also have this remove, right? I think we're watching this as a TV show. And even though what he did was pretty unforgivable, you can imagine if that was like someone imagine you're, working pharmaceuticals and you find out that somebody was taking medicine, not just taking medicine for themselves, but for example, imagine they're a pharmacist and they're swapping out some of the pills in the bottles, with lower doses and pocketing the difference, or just putting, counting out fewer pills and putting them in their pockets. And then the patient keeps showing up being like, oh, I had less of this than I expected. And you just go, yeah, you just wanted more pills. I know, I've heard this before, but no, that's not true. They're like the pharmacist like pocketing the pills. That's obviously a huge and potentially dangerous thing that you're doing to your patients. That's the real world scenario. We're trying to watch it like as a character. And we're like, yeah, you think about just people in your life that might have made terrible decisions in their lives. They should be forgiven if they can rehabilitate themselves.
Yeah, he's clearly shown that he has done that. But when you're practicing with a medical license and you do this, you lose your medical license. So basically, they have not really turned him in. Exactly. They have not called the police on him. They've pushed him into rehab. I know people in the medical field who have lost their license for taking medication for personal use out of the Pyxis. And I know a physician specifically, actually in my previous life, I was a personal trainer, and he would come to the gym all the time, and he was an anesthesiologist. And he finally told me that he could no longer practice anesthesia because he had been an addict and lost his medical license. So that is a real problem. And Langdon has gotten off pretty easy.
Probably the last thing to mention, probably the last thing to discuss is the actual button on the episode. We have Emma, this nurse trainee, who is checking on this golfer who came in with heat exhaustion. Well, maybe not heat exhaustion, but maybe you can think about the diagnosis here. This big slightly goofy looking guy did make me think about Will Ferrell, maybe because of the elf being incepted in my mind. And I'm like, although this is evil elf here, that he is apparently a very belligerent drunk, or something else is going on. I don't know if you have a diagnosis here, because this is like now another huge violent outburst, which apparently he became very violent earlier on.
I don't know for sure, but when his friend is there in the ER with him, there was a mention made of, oh, could he have been on some sort of drug? And he gets like a little bit panicked and says, oh, I'll be back at 9:00 when he'll be more awake. And he like leaves. So I have a feeling they were probably doing some other sort of chemical that may have led to his behavior because his friend got freaked out.
Well, he said that it wasn't a performance enhancing drug because apparently he did really badly on the golf in their round. But yeah, maybe there's something else going on, because I assume that this is going to be more complex than just a belligerent drunk, because this seems to be nearly psychotic, his behavior here. And he puts Emma into a headlock here, which is very disturbing. And the very last shot, as like the door's closed, people can't see what's happening in there or hear her. And so very worrying. And in the trailer, of course, you hear some people yelling out hula hoop, because the hula hoop is the sign that is the code word when there is an assault on a healthcare provider. Given what happened to Dana last season, first question I had for you when I saw this is there some kind of protocol? Like if you are physically attacked in any way by a patient, you get trained? That medical providers get trained? Just some kind of defensive actions?
No, we're not exactly trained, but when there's an emergency happening in the hospital with a non-patient, there's a code word for that someone has to recognize that it's happening. Like a code white is like, we need security because there's, a scuffle going on. And when it gets called overhead, all the security guards will run into the location that's announced. So there's protocols in place to get help for this sort of situation. But right now, no one's recognized it. So we don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, if the patient is belligerent and violent, then the ER physician can easily resedate him because it's medically necessary if they're putting someone else at risk. But in terms of training, no, it's just reacting to the situation.
For all the Emmas out there, something like this should happen, just remember he's only got his gown on and those testicles are right there. Just punch and squeeze and things will go your way a little bit more.
I was in the ICU a few years ago and there was a belligerent trauma patient who was going after his nurse. And we just happened to be walking by the room when this happened. And the surgeon that was with me immediately went in there and restrained the patient and the nurse was able to get away. And then everyone was singing his praises for rescuing her afterwards. But that was just an impromptu, like, oh my God, something's happening. Let's help them.
This seems like a really bad policy in general, by the way. I think if you have any indication that the patient could be violent, first of all, minimally, you should have a buddy system, minimally. And I actually think, why not have a little bit of like just physical defense training for, especially, not to be sexist about it, but, if you are a petite woman and treating like sometimes a 6'5" overweight or athletic person, you're obviously physically overmatched. So you minimally should have some kind of defensive training.
I can't argue with that.
Hopefully Emma's okay. I would not want to see something bad happen to Emma for sure. Like she's like such a like lamb in the woods here. And hopefully this is all going to work out. Hopefully she's just going to punch him in the nads really hard. And then they'll, have a regroup about all this.
Luckily, he's in a room with the window open. It's not like the curtain is closed. Thank God. So someone will be able to see into this room to go help her.
It seems to be, at least the way this is laid out, it seems to be like the charge nurse is always checking in and kind of has visibility.
That's how a nursing station should be set up, where you're in the middle and you can see everything. Not all hospitals are set up that way.
So theoretically, somebody is going to see something, I hope. At least somebody walking by will just peek in, like Donnie, just doing and checking on patients, popping in his head through, or not even into the room, just like looking through the window. And we'll see.
Donnie doesn't notice a lot of things, so
Donnie, that might be the opening shot next week. Donnie will
gonna walk by.
Donnie will see it and then just kind of keep going because he's just nonplussed by everything.
I'm going to say that I think Ogilvy is going to step in because he's had a bad episode this past episode. So now he's going to come to the rescue because he needs like something to prop him up.
Okay, so next week is the end of shift, not the end of season. We have 4 more episodes. Just like last year, we have extra episodes. Now, last year, what ended up happening was 12 hours passed. The shift showed it up just in the nick of time because things were absolutely out of control. Now, of course, that's not, at least in the moment. Maybe things will get crazy. Maybe there will be still some fireworks.
Things are crazy enough. I can't take it. I can't take any more tragedy. I cried too much this episode. But you're right. We haven't reached like the pinnacle of the season. I don't think I can take it.
And it doesn't have to do that, by the way. The show may very well intentionally be like, we do not want to be everybody waiting around for the disaster to happen and then the extra chaos. My question to you generally is, the shift ends next week. These people will be many of the people we've been seeing right now, unless something catastrophic happens, which possible. It'd be kind of coincidental that happens right at the 12-hour mark. So I'm skeptical that will be the case. But many of the people we see now, we're literally going to see them like kind of wrapping up their cases, talking to the other people showing up, and then leaving the building and maybe having their like drink in the park across the street. So maybe something will happen and they'll have to run back in.
They'll hang out with the drug addict in the park.
That's where Ogilvy's going right after his shift.
I have more dressings for you, ma'am.
Let me take a look at that leg again.
I think Robbie is going to stay past his shift.
For sure.
Because we've already commented on it twice. And now his friend needs a CAT scan, and we know that things are taking forever. So that's going to take 4 hours. He has at least less than 4 hours of his shift left. And then there was a comment made, does Dr. Robbie usually leave on time?
Right.
And Dana said, yeah, he usually wraps things up pretty much on time, but he's not going to be on time because he needs to check on his friend and then something bad has happened, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm very curious to know like what's going to happen in those last 3 hours, because unless, again, something catastrophic happens and all these people start showing up, we assume like Abbott went to home and rested. They specifically mentioned him maybe last episode or maybe this current episode. So maybe he went home, took a nap. He's going to show up for his shift. So we'll see some familiar faces. But I do think some of these people are going to be leaving. I agree with you that Robbie is going to be talking to Al Hashimi, for example, just talking about like end of shift and like before he goes on sabbatical. If he is going to go on sabbatical, she probably needs to have a conversation with him. He'll be checking in on Duke. He inevitably will have to, will be like, well, since I'm here, I'm going to help out with this case. I'm sure he's incapable of not doing that. So that would keep him there for like another hour or two. But it's kind of a new territory here, which could be interesting in the show if we see an actual overlap with his shift and the next shift for a couple of hours where he's present, but the other shift is there. And then we get to almost see, well, how does that family operate? And how are they like in some ways, for example, let's say they don't bring all their interpersonal issues to work. Then it's just like, well, maybe Robbie's not the best manager of these people, right? So anyway, all that is to say that I am interested in seeing like what they do with those final 3 hours. I could be wrong about all that. And that's not the point of it. It'll be like, oh my God, a fireworks display went off. And then everybody's all hands on deck, everybody. Or people were like literally like putting their jackets on, maybe not wearing jackets in July, but getting ready to leave. And they're like, oh, we got to stay.
I mean, you could have an entirely new television show based on the night team.
Maybe there'll be a spin-off. There's like a stealthy pilot for the Pitt 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Oh, God. Yeah, I don't think we necessarily need to meet a whole new cast of characters. I think there's enough going on with the current cast.
And then they can have one season of Abbott's shift, like in the summer. And if the show keeps being this popular, why not do 2 seasons a year?
We'll see about that.
I'm skeptical myself, but just curious to see what surprises they may have in store. All right. Enjoy your camping trip.
I'll try. Thank you.
And don't cry too much thinking about this show.
I will not cry, I hope. And yeah, we'll have 200 Girl Scouts in the woods for a couple days. So it should be fun.
200 girls.
The moms are included in that number.
Oh, that's true. Sure. 100 and 100. Watch your own kids.
Please.
I just picture them side by side the whole time, holding hands.
Not quite.
No, the moms will be in the cabins drinking. The girls will be bullying each other in the cabins.
They will not.
All right. We will touch base again next week. In the meantime, of course, DTF St. Louis. I'll be covering that with Sona and with Darren. Paradise. Just 2 more episodes of Paradise. had a lot of listeners, a lot of new listeners this week on the Paradise coverage and on DTF St. Louis, which seems to be picking up steam, and a very good episode of that show this week. So stay tuned for all of that. Subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you again, Kim, for the conversation.
You're welcome. I'll see you next week.
And for watching our daughter this week.
I will make sure she's safe.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening, of course.